So, let's go. Number 1, the idea that keeps coming back. You've always been told you were first, the first minds, the first builders, the first species clever enough to look up at the stars and ask what else is out there. It feels obvious, it feels true, and it might be the single biggest assumption you have never once questioned. Here's the thing evolution keeps quietly telling us. Intelligence is not a miracle that happened one time. It is a trick this planet has pulled again and again in creatures that have almost nothing in common with you. Dolphins evolved it. Elephants evolved it. Crows and ravens evolved it, running problems through a brain the size of a walnut. And then there is the octopus, which is barely even an animal by your standards. Picture what an octopus actually is. Its ancestors split off from yours more than 500 million years ago, back when the most complicated thing alive was a worm. It grew an eye that works like yours, but was built from a completely separate blueprint. It carries around 500 million neurons, about what a dog has, except most of them are not in its head. They are in its arms. It is a thinking thing that tastes with its skin and solves puzzles with limbs that have minds of their own. If something that alien can become smart on this planet, intelligence is not rare. It is a door the universe keeps kicking open. So sit with the real question. If this planet has invented intelligence over and over, in the ocean, in the air, in bodies nothing like yours, why are you so certain it only built a civilization once? In 2018, 2 scientists decided to ask that out loud. One of them, Gavin Schmidt, runs NASA's climate modeling. The other, Adam Frank, is an astrophysicist. And they published a paper with a deceptively simple title. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth long before humans, would we actually be able to find it? They called it the Silurian hypothesis, half as a joke, borrowed from an old science fiction show about a reptile race that ruled the Earth before people. They were not claiming lizard people are real. They were asking something colder. What would be left? What survives tens of millions of years? And their answer is the part that should bother you. Almost nothing would. Think about the timeline you are working with. Ever since a stretch called the Carboniferous, roughly 350 million years ago, this planet has had enough buried carbon, enough coal and oil packed into the ground to run a civilization like ours. That is a window of hundreds of millions of years. Your entire species, every city, every war, every recorded word fits into the last few thousand of them. A blink. A rounding error. Now stretch that blink across all that deep time and ask how many other blinks came and went before anyone was around to write them down. You would never see them from inside your own. You would just assume the silence meant nothing was ever there. That is what makes this idea crawl under your skin. It does not need a shred of proof to be unsettling. It only needs you to admit that being first was always a guess. A comfortable one. A guess you inherited without checking. And once you stop being certain you were first, a much worse question opens up underneath you. If something did come before, where did it go? Why can you not see it? Where does a whole world hide? The answer is that this planet is very, very good at losing things, and it starts with a hole in the record so big it swallows more time than you can picture. Number 2, the missing billion years. Go stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon and look down. You think you are looking at time. Layer on layer of rock, each one a page stacked in order, the oldest at the bottom. It looks like the most honest record on Earth, a diary the planet kept for billions of years and never edited. It lied to you, or rather it tore out the middle. Look closer at one spot in that canyon wall. There is a line, a plain, unremarkable seam in the rock, where the layer above sits directly on the layer below. Nothing strange about that, until you learn how old each side is. The rock on top formed around 540 million years ago. The rock right beneath it is roughly 1.7 billion years old. Put your hand flat across that seam and you are covering more than 1 billion years of history. Over 1 billion years, and there is nothing there. No pages, just a gap. Geologists have a dry name for it. The Great Unconformity. A man named John Wesley Powell first noticed it in 1869. rafting through the canyon, staring at a boundary that should not make sense. And here is the detail that turns it from a curiosity into something worse. It is not just in Arizona. That same impossible gap shows up on continent after continent, all over the world, at roughly the same moment in the record. A missing chapter torn out of every copy of the book at once, more than 1 billion years. That is not a typo, and it is not a small thing. That is somewhere around 1/5 of the entire history of this planet, physically gone, scraped off, erased so completely that the layers just stop, skip forward, and start again, like nothing happened. Now, scientists argue about how you erase that much world. One idea is ice. During a stretch called Snowball Earth hundreds of millions of years ago, glaciers may have ground their way across whole continents like a planet-sized belt sander, stripping away 3, 4, 5 kilometers of solid rock and dumping it into the sea. Another idea blames the slow crushing movement of the continents themselves, heaving old rock up into the sky to be weathered into nothing. The fight is still going. What nobody argues about is the result. It happened. The record has a hole in it the size of 1 billion years. So let that reset how you think about evidence. You've been trained to believe that if something really existed, it would leave a trace, and if there is no trace, there was nothing. This planet just showed you that logic breaking in your hands. An entire 1/5 of Earth's story is missing, and the rock did not keep a receipt. Whatever happened in that vanished billion years, whatever lived, whatever rose, whatever fell, you will never read it. It is not hidden in a vault somewhere waiting to be found. It was destroyed, ground down, recycled by a planet that does not care about keeping your history intact. And 1 billion years is a long time for a world to do something interesting and then be forgotten. But maybe you are thinking, fine, the surface gets wiped, the top pages get torn. The evidence must still be down there, deeper, buried below the erased part, sealed inside the planet, out of reach of the ice and the weather. Somewhere under your feet, there must be a layer that remembers. You would be right to think that. There probably is. And that leads straight to the most humbling fact about this entire planet you live on. You have never actually been down there to look. Number 3, the deepest hole we ever dug. Here is a number that should embarrass your whole species. The deepest hole humans have ever drilled into the Earth goes down about 12 kilometers. 12. And the distance from the surface to the center of this planet is over 6,300 kilometers. Do that math, and it is almost funny. After all our machines, all our engineering, the deepest we have ever reached is about 0.2% of the way to the middle. If this planet were shrunk down to the size of an apple, our greatest hole would not even break the skin. We have scratched it. That is the entire story of humanity versus the inside of its own world. We scratched it, and the scratch nearly killed the drill. That scratch has a name. The Kola Superdeep borehole in the far north of Russia, out on a cold, empty plateau near the Arctic. The Soviets started drilling in 1970, not for oil, just to see how deep they could go. Pure curiosity, aimed straight down. Year after year, they pushed a drill bit further into the crust than anything before or since. By 1989, they had reached 12,262 meters, and then they stopped. Not because they lost interest, because the planet fought back. Down at the bottom, the temperature was supposed to be around 100 degrees. Instead, it hit 180. Hot enough that the rock stopped behaving like rock. It went soft. Plastic. The walls of the hole started flowing closed behind the drill like wet clay, swallowing the tunnel as fast as they could dig it. They were not drilling through stone anymore. They were drilling into something that oozed shut. And eventually, the Earth simply won. This is the turn, so hold on to it. Everything before this was about the planet destroying its own history, grinding it away, tearing out the pages. But Kola shows you something even more unnerving. It is not only that the evidence gets erased, it is that even where the record might still be sitting perfectly intact, deep and sealed and waiting, you cannot get to it. The door is shut and the handle is on fire. We did not stop digging because we found the answer. We stopped because the way down became impossible. And the little we did find down there was strange enough. water, liquid water, squeezed out of solid crystalline rock kilometers below, where any water should be pressed out of the stone itself. Fossils, microscopic remains of tiny living things, sitting in rock 2 billion years old, far deeper than life was supposed to reach. Boundaries that the textbooks promised would be there, and simply were not. Every time they expected the planet to match the model, it shrugged and showed them something else. And then it all just stopped. The money ran out when the Soviet Union collapsed, the project was abandoned, and today, the deepest point mankind has ever reached is capped by a rusty metal lid welded shut, maybe the width of a dinner plate, bolted to the ground on an empty Arctic field. The greatest hole ever dug, and it looks like a manhole cover. Somebody forgot. So here is where you actually stand. Most of your planet's record is either destroyed or locked somewhere you physically cannot follow. You are a species that has read the first sentence of a very long book and declared it knows the ending. Which means, when you say nobody came before us, understand what that statement is really built on. Not a search. A guess. We have barely opened the ground. And the ground, it turns out, is fantastic at hiding things far bigger than a fossil. It can hide an entire continent. Number 4. The continent that vanished. You know how many continents there are. You learned it as a kid. 7. It is one of those facts so basic it feels like it came down from the sky. And it is wrong. There are 8. You just cannot see the last one because it is underwater. Its name is Zealandia. It is real. It is enormous. And until embarrassingly recently, nobody put it on the map. It sprawls across nearly 5 million square kilometers of the Southwest Pacific. That is bigger than India, a slab of continent the size of a subcontinent, sitting right there. And for all of human history, it hid in plain sight beneath the waves. Because here's the trick. About 94% of Zealandia is drowned. Only the tiniest fraction pokes above the surface, and you already know the parts that do. New Zealand, New Caledonia. A few scattered islands you thought were just islands. They are not. They are the highest peaks of a sunken continent, the little bit of a drowned world still gasping above the waterline. Everything else, the plains, the ranges, the ancient coastlines, is all down in the dark, kilometers under the sea. Zealandia was not always down there. Around 80 million years ago, it broke away from a giant supercontinent called Gondwana, the same slow-motion shattering that scattered the landmasses you know today. But this piece got a different fate. As it drifted, it stretched and thinned like pulled dough, and it sank. It did not explode or get destroyed. It just quietly went under, taking whatever was on it down into the blue. And now the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Scientists did not formally recognize Zealandia as a continent until 2017. 2017. That is more recent than the phone in your pocket. It took until 2023 to finish mapping the northern two-thirds of it, dredging rock up from the seafloor just to figure out the shape of a continent that has been sitting under our ships the entire time. Think about what that means. In an age of satellites and global positioning, an age where you can pull up a photograph of your own roof from space, a piece of the planet larger than India stayed effectively invisible until a handful of years ago. Not because it was far away, because it was underwater, and water is all it takes to make a whole world disappear from view. So, run the logic forward, the same logic this planet keeps forcing on you. If Earth can hide a continent right under the shipping lanes, right under the satellites, until the 21st century, then how confident are you about what it is not hiding? How sure are you that every drowned coastline, every sunken plain, every place that used to be dry land and is now black water, is empty of anything worth finding? Whatever was ever on Zealandia when it was above the waves, whatever walked it or grew on it in those last dry days before it sank, is now sealed under kilometers of ocean, in the dark, unreachable, unread. And Zealandia is only the one we finally noticed. The seafloor is stitched together from drowned lands, lost coasts, places that were once open air and are now crushed under cold water and silence. The planet does not even need 1 billion years to make something vanish. Sometimes it just needs the sea to rise, and sometimes, stranger still, it does the opposite. Sometimes it takes an entire sea and makes it disappear instead. Number 5. The sea that dried up. Picture the Mediterranean, Warm, blue, ringed by coastlines you can name, one of the most familiar seas on the planet. Now picture it gone. Not lower, not shrunk. Gone. A dry, cracked, blinding white pit. 3 kilometers deep, a canyon of salt where a sea used to be. That is not a fantasy. That actually happened, and by geological standards it happened yesterday. It is called the Messinian Salinity Crisis, and it ran from about 5.96 million years ago to 5.33 million years ago. The cause was almost mundane. The narrow gate at the far west, the Strait of Gibraltar, the little doorway that lets the Atlantic pour in and keep the Mediterranean full, pinched shut. Tectonics squeezed it closed, and once the doorway sealed, the sun did the rest. Because the Mediterranean sits in a hot part of the world, and hot water evaporates. With no ocean topping it up, the sea just started to leave, rising into the sky as vapor and never coming back. Over thousands of years, it drew down and down until the basin was a scorched desert lying 3, 4, even 5 kilometers below where the sea belonged. The lowest, hottest, most hostile place on the planet, walled in by cliffs that used to be coastline. And as the water left, it abandoned everything it had been carrying. Salt. Staggering amounts of salt. As the sea evaporated, it dumped its minerals across the basin floor in layers that piled up kilometers thick. Geologists call it a salt giant, and it is still down there today, a buried monument to a sea that killed itself under the sun. If you had stood on that dry floor back then, you would have faced a horizon of white nothing, air thick and furnace hot, scattered pools of brine so salty they would look almost solid. An entire sea. Erased. And then comes the part that sounds made up. Around 5.33 million years ago, the doorway at Gibraltar broke back open, and the Atlantic came home. Not gently, not over centuries. The model suggests that once the water found its way in, it came as a flood beyond anything you can picture, refilling most of that vast dead basin in as little as a few months to a couple of years. At its peak, the Mediterranean may have risen more than 10 meters a day, a wall of ocean roaring back into a desert, a waterfall dwarfing anything alive today, filling a 3-kilometer hole almost in one motion. They call it the Zanclean Flood, and it may be the single most violent refilling of a basin in the planet's history. Now, scientists still argue about the details. Some recent work pushes back on the idea that it all came in one monstrous surge. That debate is alive and unfinished, but the core of it is not in doubt. A whole sea dried out completely, sat as a salt desert for a stretch of time longer than your species has existed, and then drowned all over again. And here's why this belongs in your head. That basin flipped from sea to desert to sea. Anything that lived along those temporary shores during the dry age, anything that adapted to that strange lost world at the bottom, got buried under a mile of returning water and kilometers of salt. Sealed. Overwritten. The planet did not just hide the evidence, it poured an ocean on top of it. So the surface tears its pages out. The deep locks its doors. The sea swallows whole continents and buries entire deserts. It starts to feel like everywhere you might look, the planet has already covered its tracks. Except there is one more place, one last hiding spot, and it is not empty. It is crawling. Number 6, the world underneath. You think of life as something that happens on the surface. Up here, in the light, in the air, where you are, the thin, bright skin of the world. Everything below that is just rock. Dead, silent, empty stone all the way down. You could not be more wrong. There is a second biosphere beneath your feet, an entire living world sealed inside the crust of the planet, and it is bigger than the one you live in. For years this sounded impossible. Then a project called the Deep Carbon Observatory spent 10 years drilling into the ground and hauling up samples from mines and boreholes kilometers deep, and what they found rewrote the map of life on Earth. Down in the rock, in total darkness, with no sunlight and often no oxygen, life is everywhere. Not a few stray survivors, a civilization of microbes so vast the numbers stop feeling real. Try to hold these figures. The life hidden inside the Earth adds up to somewhere between 15 and 23 billion tons of carbon. That is hundreds of times the weight of every human being alive. Roughly 70% of all the bacteria and single-celled life on this planet is not out here with you. It is down there, in the dark, packed into rock. The underground where they live spans a volume close to twice that of all the world's oceans. The biggest living system on Earth is one you have never seen, and mostly cannot reach. And these are not creatures like you. Some of them live on almost nothing, eating the faint chemical energy of the rock itself. No sun required. Some of them barely move through time the way you do. There are microbes down there that may divide once in 100 years, once in 1,000, ticking along on a clock so slow they are practically part of the geology. A single one of them could be older than farming, older than writing, sitting in the same crack in the same stone since before your species learned to speak, alive the entire time. So look at where that leaves you. Above, the record is torn to pieces. Below, most of the crust is sealed off and too hot to reach. The oceans hide drowned continents. The salt hides dried up seas, and the one place life truly thrives, the deepest, largest habitat on the planet, is a place you can barely sample, full of things that keep geologic time and answer to nobody. We know that world is down there. We know how much of it there is. We know almost nothing about what is actually in it, and that is the whole point of everything you just heard. Not that a civilization definitely came before you. Nobody can prove that, and honestly, probably none did. The creepy part is smaller and far harder to shake. It is that you could not know either way. This planet destroys its own history, buries what it does not destroy, and hides the rest somewhere that your machines cannot follow. You have read one sentence of the book, and you are standing on the other billion pages. So the next time you catch yourself thinking you were the first, that nothing ever rose here before you, notice how good that feels. And then notice that it was never actually an answer. It was only ever the quietest, most comfortable place the silence could hide. Because the honest reply to "were we the first" is not yes, it is not even no, it is that we don't know. And this planet is very, very good at keeping it that way.